We're on the run-up to Shavuos. Shavuos is called the anniversary of the giving of the Torah. I want to speak to you a little bit about what it means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah. What does that imply about our relationship to the Torah, the administration of the Torah, in preparation for celebrating it. There's a story in the Talmud which is famous, and like everything in the Talmud, needs a lot of thought, a lot of careful thought. Let me tell you the story, and I'd like to hear what your reactions are to the story, how you understand it, and what questions it arouses in your minds, and then we'll discuss it for a little bit. There was a law that was being debated in the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is 71 members. Complex new law. And there was a disagreement. It was rather lopsided. On the one side, you had Rabbi Eliezer, and the other side, you had everybody else. Well, 70-1. It was pretty clear who was going to win. But Rabbi Eliezer was an outstanding scholar, so they were hoping, through discussion, to come to some kind of meeting of the minds. Well, they went through all the different facets of the problem, and the positions remained consistent. Rabbi Eliezer was on one side, everybody else was on the other side. Sensing that the end was near, Rabbi Eliezer decided that he was going to employ a kind of unique argumentation. He said, if I'm right, let this bush get up and walk 50 paces, which it did. What to make of that? So Rabbi Yeshua, representing the majority, said, that's not a proof, it's not an argument, it's not evidence, it plays no role in the discussion, it's not relevant to our discussion of a legal point. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer said, well, if I'm right, let the water in this stream flow uphill. And it went uphill. And Rabbi Yeshua answered the same thing. Miracles with water flowing in streams have nothing to do with a legal argument. Rabbi Eliezer then said, if I'm right, let the walls of the house of study cave inwards. And there was a rumbling, and the walls started to cave inwards. Whereupon Rabbi Yeshua said to the walls, how dare you interrupt the discussion of the sages? And the Talmud says that the walls stopped collapsing out of respect for Rabbi Yeshua, but remained inclined out of respect for Rabbi Eliezer. Well, it clearly isn't working. So finally, Rabbi Eliezer played his trump card. He said, if I'm right, let a voice from heaven proclaim that I'm right. And it did. What to do now? Rabbi Yeshua said, Lo b'shamayim, the Torah is not in heaven. And they voted against Rabbi Eliezer. 70-1. How do you hear that? How does that strike you? What would you respond to a story like that? Yeah.
One, that Hashem is Makel. And two, that
I didn't say which way the decision came from heaven. I didn't say whether he said it was pure or impure. I didn't say that.
Hashem is Makel, and clearly Elazar had Ruach HaKodesh.
Now wait a second. Since I didn't tell you the sides, I didn't tell you who is going to be stringent, who's going to be lenient, how can you infer that the voice from heaven, supported Rabbi Eliezer, was a voice for leniency? Maybe it was the voice of stringency. I didn't tell you what the two sides of the argument were. Okay. You have this idea that you are desperate to get across, and you said, that's one thing. And then now you're telling me, well, if Rabbi Yeshua got it right, if he's the one whom the voice from heaven verifies, then he has some kind of inspiration, some kind of either prophetic spirit or Holy Spirit. That's what you're saying.
No, Elazar, no?
Yeah. So he's the one who the voice verified, right? So he's saying, look, he's in tune with what's going on in heaven, so that gives him special status. Okay. But then, how could the other 70 go against him? If he's got some special status, and the voice of heaven actually verifies that he's right, what's going on in their minds? Now, what did Rabbi Yeshua say? The Torah is not in heaven. Isn't that a little audacious? Here's a voice coming from heaven. The voice says Rabbi Elazar's right. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, the voice Torah's not in heaven, not listening, not paying any attention. Where does he get the authority to do that? How can he just talk off, slough off a voice from heaven? Well, here's one secret I didn't tell you so far. Those words, the Torah is not in heaven, are in the Torah itself, in the book of Deuteronomy. Which means, thank you very much, which means that God himself dictated those words, that the Torah is not in heaven. So what is Rabbi Yeshua doing when he says the Torah is not in heaven? To a voice from heaven. What is he saying? You yourself told us not to decide legal issues by a voice from heaven. So, I'm not going to follow the voice from heaven because you, in giving us the Torah through Moses, told us not to listen to voices from heaven. Okay, but let's push it now a little harder. Is the voice from heaven telling the truth? Presumably. That's an assumption we could make. Maybe we'll have to question it later. But we could assume that the voice from heaven is telling the truth. So, how could there be a rule not to listen to the truth? The voice from heaven is telling the truth. The rule that God wrote in the book of Deuteronomy is, when you have a source of truth, don't listen to the source of truth. What kind of rule would that be? Now, for those of you who are Americans, there's a piece of American jurisprudence which has exactly this logic. Exactly this logic. I'll wager that you're familiar with it. What happens in an American court of law in the following case? Someone is accused of a crime, and the prosecution introduces a wiretap of his phone, which they play in court, and it's absolutely clear, number one, that it's his voice, and number two, given that he spoke those words, he's guilty. No question about it. Then, the defense argues that the police didn't have a court order to tap his phone. They had no legal authority to tap his phone. What happens in an American court when that happens? You got to throw out the evidence. Evidence gathered illegally is inadmissible in court. By the way, that's the result of a Supreme Court decision. It's not legislation, but it's been on the books for 60 years or more. Let's suppose that the recording of his phone is the only piece of evidence. What's going to happen to the defendant? Got to drop the case. There's no evidence anymore. So he's going to go free, right? But look, everybody knows he's guilty. Everybody. The judge, the jury, the press, the public, everyone knows he's guilty. He's going to go free anyhow. Why is that? Because in a legal situation, you can't always use what you know. You can't use all the truth that's available. It depends upon how you got the truth. And the law can say, we're not questioning the truth of the recording. The recording is true, and in fact, he did commit the crime. But you can't convict him in court without evidence, and this piece of evidence can't be included in the court. It can't be submitted to the court. So here's a case where you know the truth, and yet you have to arrive at a decision that doesn't agree with the truth, because the legal rule is don't pay attention to that kind of truth. That's, I think, exactly parallel to what we have in the Talmud's story. We have a source of truth, a voice from heaven. There's no more reliable source of truth than that. But when Hashem gave us the Torah, he said, Lo b'shamayim, the Torah is not in heaven, which means that even a voice from heaven, which is surely telling the truth, you can't pay attention to that. You can't use that as the basis of a legal decision. This is an illustration of the idea that God gave us the Torah. He cut the strings. It's ours now. We have to study it, analyze it, interpret it, and apply it. And of course, we are fallible. We will make mistakes. What God is saying is, I'll live with your mistakes. I'll live with your mistakes. In fact, there's a whole tractate which talks about procedures in the Sanhedrin, and it talks about what happens when the Sanhedrin changes its mind. At least one of the two of these is wrong. Maybe both are wrong, but one of them is wrong. And it talks about the consequences of that sort of thing. So we take very seriously the idea that human beings are fallible. There is some talk among the Rishonim about this. For those who know, I'm citing the Ran now, among others. So the fact that it's in our hands means that we administer it. And if you think about it, the situation that we're in vis-a-vis the Creator, I think there are only two possible ways to administer a relationship which is based on rules that have to be followed. The rules are given. There are two ways to do it. One way to do it is, I gave you the rules, I want you to study them, I want you to think about them, analyze them, try to interpret them, but I know you're going to make mistakes, so once a year, you can consult with me and I'll correct your mistakes. In other words, God could still have his finger in the pie, so to speak, still stirring the soup, so that from time to time, he could give us better understanding, or make emendations that are necessary, and thereby keep control of the application of the Torah. There are religions like that. There are religions like that. But not Judaism, not the Torah. The only other way to do it is to say that God is not going to continue to give input, not going to continue to control, and then the system has to be understood to live with the outcome of human reasoning. There's an extension of this idea. The Gemara says the following. Rabbi Meir, one of the great sages, was so outstanding, he so outclassed the other members of the Sanhedrin that if you had an issue and he would argue pro, everybody would say, yeah, right, of course, pro, that's the right answer. But if the next day he argued con, they would listen to him and say, oh, yeah, right, con, no question. And they couldn't keep up with him. In other words, whatever he was saying at the moment, it was so convincing and so well argued that it overwhelmed them. And the result was that very often the decision did not follow Rabbi Meir's opinion. Why? Because lo b'shamayim hi, the Torah is not in heaven, has a further implication. Those members of the Sanhedrin have to vote on the basis of their own understanding. What Rabbi Meir proved was his understanding was so superior that the others couldn't understand him. They couldn't follow him. They couldn't encompass his whole scholarship. So, each one voted on the basis of his own understanding. Now, you have 71 people there. They're not all equal. They're not all equally old. People joined the Sanhedrin one by one. There were 71 in the Sanhedrin and 71 facing them of disciples ready to take the place of those who leave, sickness, death, having to do something else. And they were in order. And when one left, the next one in order went up and took his place. People sat in the position of disciples for years before it became their turn to be pushed up into the main group. The people of the main group could have had a difference of age of 20 years. And differences in levels of scholarship. I'm sitting on Sanhedrin. I'm number 62. And there's an argument and discussion. And numbers 3, 4, and 5 take a position and give their arguments. Wouldn't it be logical for me to say, they're 3, 4, and 5, and I'm 62. Come on. I can't hold up that candle to them. My intuition tells me differently, but they're surely more likely to be right than I am. Wouldn't it be right to vote with them because most likely I'll get it right? And the answer is, in logic, yes. If this were medicine, that's what you should do. If this were wartime and you're figuring strategy, that's what you should do. But on the Sanhedrin, you're not allowed to do that. You have to vote your own mind. And if they, numbers 3, 4, and 5, put forth arguments which you don't really follow, can't encompass, then you mustn't vote according to what they say. You must vote according to what you understand. It means the Creator wants the distilling of 71 independent views. This has a consequence when you're dealing with a capital case. This is in a court of 23. Somebody's accused of a capital crime, and there's going to be a discussion. Discussion starts with the least member of the 23 and goes up in order. Because we're afraid that if the oldest and most scholarly of the 23 announces their opinion, others will be swayed and influenced by him and vote because they want to be on his side, so to speak, and that's not allowed. You have to vote your own mind. So here again, a legal rule trumps what otherwise would be a clear piece of logic. Vote with the people who know the best. Follow the view of the experts. Yes. If you're doing medicine, you should do that. If you're doing auto mechanics, you should do that. But in law, you have a rule that you don't do that. Because that's what the legal system wants. It wants the view of each person on the Sanhedrin. A similar question which I asked Rabbi Meisman, who's one of my teachers, once, I said, let's suppose you have a controversial issue, what to do in a certain situation, and it's multiply controversial, and there are three main views, what to do, A, B, and C. And it's three great scholars, one says A, one says B, one says C. If I go to one of the scholars and ask him what to do, what is he going to say? Let's say I go to the one who represents B. Is he going to say B? Doesn't he know there's a 2/3 probability that he's wrong? Because the other two are against him. Each one should know there's a 2/3 probability that he's wrong. What should we do? Well, sometimes when there's a difference of opinion like this, you can satisfy all three. How to write a contract. How should the contract be written? This way, this way, or this way. Write 3 contracts. One for each view, and sign all 3 contracts. Then all 3 are satisfied. Sometimes you can just act in a way where you don't have to decide. Or if one is stringent and the other is lenient, going back to your suggestion, and you're dealing with a biblical issue, the rule is be stringent. So follow the strict opinion. If it's a rabbinic issue, be lenient. So you have a rule to decide what to do in those circumstances. That's not the legal rule. The legal rule is each one should teach and should decide in terms of the principle that he believes in. So I said to Rabbi Mazin, but look, we have reason to think for each one that it's likely that he's wrong. He said, in probability, you're right. In law, you're wrong. That's what the Torah tells us to do in terms of law. When you're at the top level of the leaders of the generation, each one has the authority and responsibility to give the decision that seems to him to be correct. So there's a double message here. Number one, the Torah belongs to us. And number two, that means that we have to interpret it, understand it, and apply it. Now, I'm talking about within the Sanhedrin. I'm not talking about every shul rabbi, in Wisconsin and in Johannesburg can make his own decisions on his own. They should definitely look up the ladder to those who are the greatest scholars of the time. The independence there is not appropriate. But when you're talking about the Sanhedrin, then it is. You had a question before, then I didn't answer. Okay. That's one example of what it means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah. We're together so far? Okay, here's another one which, when I first read it, I was like in shock. Some laws that we have, were invented by the rabbis. The Torah gives the authority to the rabbis under certain circumstances to create new laws. Only certain types of laws can be created, and they have certain limitations, but they can do it, and indeed they're encouraged to do it. And there's a raft of rabbinic legislation. What is the status of a law that the rabbis create? There is some discussion about this, the medieval authorities. The majority opinion is this. Even though the rabbis created it, it has the same status as Torah law given by God. How could that be? Torah law given by God was dictated by God to Moses and transmitted from God through Moses to us, and here human beings made it. So here's an analogy that they give. Let's imagine a king, and his kingdom is quite large, so he's divided up his kingdom into different provinces, and he appoints a governor over each province. And he gives each governor a charter. And in the charter it says, I, the king, appoint him as governor, and I, the king, command that you follow the laws he creates. Aha. Now, there are laws for the kingdom that the king created, and then there are the laws of the province that the governor created. I live in the province. I violate one of the governor's laws. The king's soldiers come to my house and say, what did you do? Listen, guys. It's a local matter. You represent the king. He represents the nation as a whole. It's a local matter. It's between me and the governor, What will they say? The king gave the governor a charter. And in the charter it says, the king puts his authority on what the governor decides. So when you violate the governor's rule, you are then violating the king's charter. So that's a model for how it's understood that when the rabbis make a rule, the force of the rule is Torah force, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who gave us the Torah, told us that he puts his authority behind what they decide. You'll tell me if you know a little bit, but look, we know that the way we treat rabbinic laws is to treat them as less important, less binding, less authoritative than Torah laws. For example, suppose I'm in a situation where two laws contradict. That happens. And suppose one law is biblical and one law is rabbinic. And I can't do both. The rule always is, almost always, is do the biblical law and violate the rabbinic law. If the rabbinic law has the same authority as the biblical law, why isn't it a toss-up? That's one question. Penalties. If you violate a Torah law, there's certain penalties. If you violate a rabbinic law, almost uniformly the penalties are less. If it has the same authority, why is it then that it has the lesser penalty? A third case. Suppose I'm supposed to do something and I can't remember if I did it or not. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I usually do it, but maybe I forgot. So if the requirement is a biblical requirement, I have to go back and do it again. But if it's a rabbinic requirement, I don't have to go back and do it again. So the critic says, look, clearly the rabbinic laws don't have the same status as the biblical laws, because they are treated as less authoritative, less significant in all three cases. And the answer that's given is, no, they have exactly the same authority. It's just that when the rabbis wrote the law, they wrote in these leniencies. The rabbi said, here's what you have to do, but if you're not sure, you think maybe you did it, maybe you didn't, you can't remember, then don't bother. They wrote that in. If they hadn't written it in, it wouldn't be that way. Rabbis write in the law, here's what you have to do, but if there's a biblical law and they contradict what we're saying, do what the biblical law says and don't do what we're saying. So when there's a conflict, of course you do what the biblical law says, because they wrote in that that's what you should do. So this is the majority view, that really they have biblical authority. Yes?
But the question is, there is like rabbinic mitzvah and rabbinic averis that were established, Torah mitzvah, Torah averis, but there are like some rules, like for example, don't eat 8 hours before Shabbos, like according to that, or like certain things like that. Do not necessarily contribute in avera, nor a mitzvah, like, but it's like minhag or something like that. How do we explain them?
Oh, okay. First of all, it's not 8 hours, and second of all, it's not a minhag. It is a rule. It's written in the Mishnah. But you talk about custom. So custom is something else. Custom is a very important topic. I'll just take 2 minutes to sketch it, but I'm not exhausting it. You have a set of laws, and then you have strategies for implementing the laws, which doesn't say anything about authority. They're all authoritative, but you have limited resources. Material resources, limited human resources, even each person's own character, strength, intelligence, you have limited resources. And sometimes you have to set priorities, practical priorities. How much can I accomplish? And sometimes the decisions are very subtle. They're very difficult to make. Minhag is a question of creating a strategy for implementing the laws as best possible. And each community and each set of authorities are encouraged to create their own minhagim, their own so-called customs, because their circumstances are different. In time and space, the circumstances are going to be different, and the strategies will be different. And the bottom line is, if it's in place long enough, then it takes on the status of a law. Minhag Yisrael kedinu. Eventually it takes on the status of a law, albeit the least stringent, least authoritative law. Now, having said this, I want to make it clear, not everything that a Jewish community does becomes a minhag. It depends upon whether the custom serves some legal purpose or not. I'll give you a very simple example. Lots and lots of Jews eat herring, pickled herring. There's no minhag to eat pickled herring. Sorry. Enjoy it, but it's not a minhag. But there's also gefilte fish. There is a minhag to eat gefilte fish. Why is that? They're both fish. How can one fish be a minhag and the other fish not? The answer is very simple. On Shabbos, when you eat fish, you're not allowed to take the bones out of the flesh of the fish and then eat it. You can't do that. You're separating the bad from the good. You're not allowed to do that. Well, if you're hungry especially, that's a project, and it's a temptation. Here you grind up the fish with the bones, so you get all the nutrition, and you make it into a paste, and then you cook that, and then the problem doesn't arise. So eating gefilte fish is a way of avoiding a legal transgression. That could become a minhag. A minhag is a community-wide custom which serves some legal purpose. The legal purpose doesn't require it. Nowhere is it written that you must grind fish and not have bones, but it's a very clever way to avoid facing this kind of problem. So herring is not a minhag, and gefilte fish would be a minhag. Yeah.
What if you don't do it,
So each community has its customs, and if you join a community, then you adopt its customs, a law as that lowest level of law, like everything else. The Gemara in Pesachim talks about people who travel and relocate. In those days, in most towns, maybe it's true even today, small towns, you have one shul, one rabbi, and one set of customs. And if you relocate, you change your customs and change the laws that you keep to be part of the new community. By the way, this means that you don't have to keep the customs of your father. Many people are mistaken about this. There's no rule that a child must keep the customs of his father. If he joins a different community, he'll take on the new customs of that community. So this is okay. That's the basic background for customs. At any rate, yes. So you're talking about rabbinic rules. So now they have the same authority as the straightforwardly biblical rules, and the fact that they have leniencies is because rabbis wrote them in. Ask the Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Lusato. This is in an essay called Ma'amar al Ha'ikorim, Essay on Fundamentals. It's printed at the back of many of the editions of The Way of God by Lusato. He asked the following question: if these laws have biblical authority anyway, why didn't God give them to us directly? Why did they wait for the rabbis to make them up? So you might think, well, many of them are responses to specific conditions, like, for example, the holiday of Purim or the holiday of Hanukkah, which took place through historical events that took place much later, thousands of years after Sinai. Or there were cases where Jews became weak in a certain area and needed new safeguards in that area, but there was a reason for those rules to be used before they became weak. So maybe it wasn't possible for God to put them in there. Couldn't there be a list of optional rules? When things get tough, use this rule. So that could be given from Sinai, and the rules could be formulated. The Ramchal says something, as I said, when I saw it originally, I was astonished. He says, he wanted us to have a hand in creating Torah. He wanted us to have a hand in creating Torah. Wow. I think of the goal of my life to fulfill the Torah as best I can. Fulfill it. They're rules, they're divine, and I'm going to try to do them. Creating Torah? It's such a grand idea, such an overwhelmingly great idea. I couldn't imagine what it means for a human being to create Torah. Torah, so to speak, is the mind of the Creator. How could that possibly be? I thought about it for a while, quite a while. And then I think I have a kind of approach to the idea. We have categories of holiness, things that are holy. The Jewish people is holy. The land of Israel is holy. The city of Jerusalem is holy. The Temple Mount, different sections of the temple. Certain crops have holiness. Part of the crop that goes to the Kohen is holy. Then we have a Sefer Torah and mezuzah and tefillin. And then you have sacrifices, which could be animals, or it could be wine, or it could be oil, or it could be flour. These are categories of holiness. What's our relationship to those categories? The answer is that for almost all of them, we can add to them. We can increase them. So, for example, the Jewish people has certain holiness, and we can accept converts, and then they become Jewish. So we make more Jews. And we can add on to the geography of the land of Israel. We can add on to the geography of Jerusalem. We can add on to the geography of the Temple Mount. We have the authority to do that. There are procedures for doing that. And then the holiness of those pieces of geography spreads. We write Torah scrolls, and they become holy. The ink, the parchment, becomes holy. We make them, and then we have new items of holiness. Same thing's true with sacrifices. You take an animal and you say, I designate this animal as so sacrifice. It becomes holy because I say so. And automatically it goes into a different category of restrictions of what can be done with it and instructions to what should be done with it. Sounds like these things, this kind of holiness, God gives us the ability to increase them. Even mitzvos. How about mitzvos? Can we increase mitzvos? Well, in one sense not. Lo b'shamayim, the Torah is not in heaven. And that being the case, we can't add to Moses' revelation. But in the Torah itself, it talks about oaths and vows, nedorim and shavuos. An oath or a vow is where a person, by a statement, creates new responsibilities for himself. And those responsibilities become biblical. A person says, I take a vow not to eat apples. No apples. They're just as bad as pigs. They're just as bad as pigs, maybe worse. He's created a new prohibition for himself because the Torah put into it this open-ended authority to create new prohibitions or to create responsibilities, that he will do something. Davenates every morning or whatever it is. So it seems like the whole set of divinely ordained categories is open to some kind of human control, especially when it's a question of increasing, not decreasing, but increasing. Now, says the Ramchal, rabbinic legislation is the Jewish people creating Torah. It has biblical authority, and he wants it to come through us because he wants us to have a hand in creating Torah. And this is a very dramatic idea to supplement idea which I think I have mentioned to you, and it's a very common idea in Jewish thought, that God wants us to be partners in perfecting the creation. He created the world incomplete and left it for us to join him in the process of completing it. And by the way, something that's left incomplete, could you really call it perfect? If it's incomplete, shouldn't God's creation be perfect? So I'll give you an illustration. In the mail, you get a box. A box. You open up the paper, and on the cover of the box is a beautiful picture. Wow, somebody sent me this beautiful picture. That's so nice. I'll open it up, and if it isn't framed, I'll frame it. And you open it up, and inside there are just a bunch of irregularly shaped loose pieces. And you think, some kid got to this and chopped it all up. What a terrible tragedy. It's all chopped up into pieces. Where's my picture? Of course, it's a puzzle. Now, is it perfect? Well, it's a perfect puzzle. That's what a puzzle should be. There should be a lot of pieces that you have to put together. It's perfect in fulfilling the purpose for which it was created. That's how you define perfection. Not with a preconceived idea. A picture is good and scattered irregular pieces are worthless. No, the question is, what is it for? So by creating the world incomplete, God made a perfect world. It's perfect for the purpose of enabling us to be partners with him in the process of completing it. So, part of the process of completing it is creating Torah. After all, for the first roughly 2,000 years of the world's existence, there wasn't Torah. I'm leaving out the Garden of Eden now. The Torah was given at Sinai long after that history. Somehow, there was a world without Torah in it, this kind of Torah, the Torah with all the mitzvahs in it, and then the Torah came into it. So part of the process of developing and completing the world was giving the Torah into the world. What we're being told is that process wasn't a one-time shot. It was a continuous process. Now you think, okay, but it's wonderful to know that. Then it's wonderful to be part of a people who have 0.1% of the representatives of the people who can participate in that. But it's more than that. First of all, where do these new pieces of Torah come from? What motivates them to create them? Well, what motivates them is the circumstances on the ground, how people are succeeding in fulfilling their Torah responsibilities. Often, a new law is triggered by a question that arises, a circumstance that a person finds himself in, and he comes to the rabbinic leadership and says, what do I do in this circumstance? And if it's a difficult question, it goes up the ladder to the top, and the top say, oh, there's a new circumstance, I think we should handle it this way, and they create a rule. So his living example is the trigger for that new rule coming into existence. We have examples of this in the Chumash itself. When they were in the wilderness for a year, came back to be the year after they had left Egypt, and they were instructed to make the holiday of Pesach in that month. And they've been given some rules as to who can and who can't, under what conditions. And there was a group of people who were in a condition where they couldn't fulfill the laws of the Pesach. And they came to Moshe and they said, we're stuck. The laws don't allow us. we feel terrible. We're excluded from doing God's mitzvah at its time as part of the Jewish people. What should we do? And Moses took the question to the Creator, and he came back and said, for people like that, I'm going to give a second chance. And the 14th of Iyar, a month later, I have what's called Pesach Sheni, when they can do it to make up for the fact that they couldn't do it the first time because of circumstances that were beyond their control. So that mitzvah came into existence because people faced the problem and in good faith wanted to be able to do what God wants, and the rules excluded them, and that triggered the presentation. I'm not saying that because of them God decided to make the rule, but they're the trigger of it that shows you the process by which Torah comes into the world. Same thing with the daughters of Slavchad who wanted to share in the land. They also were raising a question which hadn't been settled. And when they raised it, God communicated the answer to them and said the very dramatic words, Cain, Benos, Slavchad, Dovros. The daughters of Slavchad speak well. They speak rightly. You can imagine presenting a question and an alternative to the Sanhedrin and getting a report back that the prophet says, God said you spoke rightly. That's really off the page. And the halacha was made like that, and they take that for the generation. So later generations, you have a similar thing also. People face dilemmas, and they are struggling to do the right thing, and they come to the local rabbi, and he passes it up the chain, and the decisions are made. So this is a bottom-up flow by which this new Torah can come into existence. There is a statement which the Ramchal makes about the Talmud. It's almost about the Zohar. It's almost in the Zohar, that the Torah and the Jewish people and the Kodesh Baruch Hu are one. They're all one. Well, you'll get used to the idea that in our literature, statements are made often in poetical form, and they're often made in very limited application, limited circumstances. We're not saying that the Jewish people created the universe out of nothing. No, we're not saying that. And we're not saying that the Torah is alive and fulfills mitzvos. What we're saying is there's a certain unity of their interactions. And the Maharal, there are many, many applications of this idea, but the Maharal says the following. This is a lesson for us. He says, think about unity. Unity doesn't mean everybody agrees on everything, but unity means that everybody's committed to the same overall principles, the same overall values, and they respect one another's opinions, similar to what I said about minhag before, because everybody wants to fulfill the Torah in the best possible way. And there are different strategies for doing so, and different strategies work better for different groups at different times. And therefore, a multiplicity of strategies is a good idea, because there are different groups and different people and different circumstances that have to be addressed. That's when unity operates in the appropriate way. When there's disagreement and disrespect and devaluation and delegitimization, then it's different. Then the group is fragmented. And since the Torah and the Jewish people are one, and there are people within the Jewish people who represent the Torah, unity at the top and unity in the rest of the nation go hand in hand. And sometimes people wonder why the greatest scholars disagree with one another. There could be many different reasons, but one reason could be is that the people and the rest of the population don't respect one another. People in the rest of the population don't honor one another, with differences of opinion. And that disunity in the rest of the nation causes disunity at the top, because it's all one fabric, one interacting fabric. So instead of pointing the finger at the top and say, why can't you get it together? Why can't you agree? You should turn the finger around maybe and point it at yourself and think, am I respecting others like me on my level? Am I treating them with honor? Or am I putting them down? Am I interested in proving that I'm superior? Am I looking to honor them? They can go up and down the ladder. So, the way in which we treat each other, we on the level of the rest of the population, can have effect on what opportunities and alternatives are available to the scholars on the top. So again, we can have a hand in the procedure that they are following. And this is an explanation of a law which otherwise people find very difficult. With this, I'm going to quit for today. But which people find very difficult to understand. I have a problem, a religious problem. I go to the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin says, this is what you should do. This is the rule. Okay, so I do it. 17 years later, Sanhedrin by now has different people in it. Some people died, some people left, other people came in, they discuss the same issue, and they come out with a different answer. What should I do now? So in human legal systems, there's a rule of no ex post facto legal ruling. A new ruling applies only for the future. It doesn't apply for the past. And there are practical reasons for that, because if a new ruling 3 years from now could apply to the past, I can't be certain that what I'm doing now is right. Shall I invest my money? Shall I not? Maybe the Supreme Court will make a decision, I'll lose my money. So therefore, in human terms, always when there's a new legal decision, whether it's the legislature or the judiciary, it's always forward-looking to the future. But in the case of Sanhedrin, it's not that way. If I ask the Sanhedrin, can I do this on Shabbos? And they say yes, and I do it. And 17 years later, Sanhedrin says that it can't be done, then I have to bring a sacrifice for the fact that I violated Shabbos. Now, intuitively, you say, but what else could I do? What do you want from me? I went to the Sanhedrin. I went to the top possible authority, and they told me what to do. How can you hold me responsible? Why should I need any atonement or cleansing when I did the best possible thing? One of the answers is, Shigigas, Talmud Olazodom. When a mistake is made in the understanding and application of the Torah, it isn't counted as fully accidental, as fully unintentional. It's counted as if there were some element of deliberate mistake in it. Where does that come from? Well, one place it comes from is, what do you mean you made a mistake? Would you make a mistake in the life-saving medicines you're giving your mother? Probably not. Which pill is it? I don't remember. Give her this one. You probably wouldn't do that, because that's really important. That's really important. But whether I get the Mishnah right about Hilchos Shabbos, okay, maybe yes, maybe no. All right, I'll do it anyway. So there's that indication. And then, if the functioning of Sanhedrin is in part a reflection of how we and the rest of the level of the population function, that something goes wrong in the Sanhedrin, we may have a hand in that responsibility. Because if we were more zealous about learning Torah and respecting Torah and honoring the Torah and implementing the Torah, then the Sanhedrin wouldn't have made that mistake. So then maybe, when I have to bring a sacrifice, even though I asked the Sanhedrin, according to the second Sanhedrin, the first Sanhedrin made a mistake. How did the mistake take place? I may very well be partially responsible for that mistake. So again, you see how the nation is connected in this way. But these are some examples of the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah and it really belongs to us. I do want to make one more remark, which I heard from my Rebbe Zatzal. We have a celebration of the Torah. Does anybody know when it is and what it's called? Simchas Torah. When is that? The fall, the end of Sukkot. End of Sukkot. We're celebrating the Torah. Golly, if in 3 days it's going to be an anniversary of the receiving of the Torah at Sinai, wouldn't that be the time to celebrate the Torah? I mean, wouldn't that be appropriate? So you say, well, listen, when we read the Torah, we're celebrating really finishing reading the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses. Right? You finish it then, and then you celebrate finishing, as we celebrate finishing any significant unit of Torah study. We're celebrating the finishing of the reading of the 5 books of Moses. Okay, I hear that. But why don't we start and finish the reading of the 5 books of Moses on Shavuos? And then we'll celebrate it. This is a good question. When you go out, you're going to places for meals, you can ask that question. My Rabbi asked the question. He said there's a difference between celebrating the giving of the Torah and celebrating the receiving of the Torah. A transfer has 2 active parties, one who gives and one who receives. The Shavuos, when we stood at the mountain and God spoke to us, that's our commemoration of His giving it. But our receiving it with joy, is something which has a separate, independent celebration. In a sense, the situation would be too complex to celebrate both of them simultaneously. You wouldn't be able to focus on the 2 different aspects that way, number one. And number 2, we celebrate it on the holiday of greatest joy. Sukkot is the holiday of greatest joy, and the receiving of the Torah is the greatest joy that the Jewish people ever had, and the Jew has available to him. And that being the case, the celebration is separate at that time. Now to remember, it's Yom Matan Torah Seinu. The words that we have in the prayers are the day of the giving. Not receiving, not transfer, but giving. We're celebrating what He did in giving to us. And later, when we come to Sukkot, we'll celebrate our receiving. Okay? We'll pick it up tomorrow, Mr. Chef.